bell, subscribe to my YouTube channel for deeply emotional, romantic, and mature stories that echo through your heart. Don't forget to like, share, and comment to support meaningful storytelling. The rain drummed against the kitchen window as Bridget Kim stirred her coffee, watching the steam rise like the doubts that had been clouding her mind for weeks. 3 years of marriage, and she had never questioned David's friendship with Marcus, until tonight, when everything she thought she knew would shatter like glass on stone. But let's start from the beginning, when trust was as natural as breathing, and betrayal was just a word in someone else's story. Bridget had always prided herself on being the kind of wife who welcomed her husband's friends with open arms. When David first introduced her to Marcus Chen 2 years ago, she saw immediately why they had been inseparable since college. Marcus had this easy charm, a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most interesting person alive. He was successful, handsome in that effortless way some men are, and genuinely seemed to care about David's happiness. "He's like the brother I never had," David would often say, and Bridget believed him. She wanted to believe him. The three of them fell into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus would join them for dinner parties, holiday celebrations, and weekend barbecues. He brought thoughtful gifts. Not expensive, but meaningful. A book of poetry for Bridget because he remembered she mentioned loving Neruda. A vintage baseball card for David from their shared childhood team. He remembered birthdays, anniversaries, the small details that showed he cared. Bridget worked as a graphic designer from their home office, while David traveled frequently for his consulting job. During those lonely weeks when David was away, Marcus would sometimes stop by to check on her, always respectful, always appropriate. They would sit on the porch, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. He told her about his divorce 2 years prior, how it had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about love and commitment. "You and David give me hope," he had said one evening, his voice soft with something she couldn't quite name. "Seeing how you two love each other, it reminds me that real love exists." Those words had warmed her heart then. Now, as she stood in her kitchen 3 months later, they felt heavy with meaning she had been too naive to see. The first crack in her trust came on a Tuesday evening in September. David was in Chicago for 2 weeks, and Bridget was working late on a client project when her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late again. You need to take better care of yourself," she smiled, typing back. "Someone has to pay the bills while David's away." Smiling face with smiling eyes. "He's lucky to have you. I hope he knows that." Something about the message felt different, more intimate than their usual friendly exchanges, but she pushed the feeling aside, telling herself she was reading too much into it. The second crack came a week later. Marcus had invited them both to his company's annual gala, but David's flight was delayed. Marcus picked up Bridget anyway, insisting she shouldn't miss the event she had been looking forward to. She remembered how handsome he looked that night in his black tuxedo, how his eyes lingered on her emerald dress a moment too long, how he introduced her to his colleagues as David's beautiful wife with a tone that made her cheeks flush, how they danced when the band played slow songs, and she felt something stirring in her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. "You look incredible tonight," he had whispered as they swayed to the music, his breath warm against her ear. "Marcus," she had started to pull away, but he held her gaze. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said that. It's just, David's a lucky man." She had gone home that night feeling confused and guilty, even though nothing had actually happened. She told herself it was just the wine, the romantic atmosphere, the loneliness of David being away so much. But deep down, she knew something had shifted between them. David returned the next day, tired and distracted from his business trip. When she tried to tell him about the gala, he barely listened, already focused on his next project. She found herself comparing his distracted kisses to the way Marcus had looked at her on the dance floor, and the guilt ate at her like acid. The third crack, the one that would eventually split everything wide open, came on Halloween night. David was supposed to be home for the holiday, but his client demanded an emergency meeting in New York. He left that morning with apologetic kisses and promises to make it up to her. "I hate leaving you alone on Halloween," he said, shouldering his travel bag. "Maybe Marcus can come over, watch some scary movies with you." The suggestion felt loaded now, dangerous in a way it never had before. But Bridget nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Marcus arrived at 7 with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine. He had always been thoughtful like that, always seemed to know exactly what would make her smile. She CLAS for IC for Wara and Aurora, or FW Roft IL her MS, just as they had done dozens of times before. But tonight felt different. Every accidental touch when they reached for popcorn sent electricity through her skin. Every laugh they shared felt charged with unspoken tension. Halfway through Casablanca, Marcus had insisted they needed something romantic after all the horror. He turned to her during the famous airport scene. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ilsa had stayed with Rick?" he asked, his voice quiet in the lamp-lit living room. "She made the right choice," Bridget replied, though her voice sounded uncertain even to her own ears. "She chose duty over desire. She chose her husband. But was she happy?" Marcus shifted closer on the couch, and she could smell his cologne, that warm, woodsy scent that had become so familiar. "Sometimes I think about the paths we don't take, the feelings we don't act on because they're inconvenient or complicated." Bridget's heart was racing now. She knew she should change the subject, suggest they watch something else, anything to break the spell that seemed to be weaving itself around them. Instead, she found herself looking into his dark eyes, seeing her own longing reflected there. "Marcus," she whispered, and she wasn't sure if it was a warning or an invitation. He reached out and touched her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "Bridget, I have to tell you something. I've been carrying this for months, and it's eating me alive." She should have pulled away then. Should have stood up, created distance, reminded them both of all the reasons this moment was dangerous. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed. "I'm in love with you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I have been since that first dinner party when you laughed so hard at David's terrible joke that you snorted wine through your nose. I know it's wrong. I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just friendship." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge she could either cross or burn. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression of such vulnerable hope that it took her breath away. She started, then stopped, because what could she say? That she had been fighting the same feelings. That she dreamed about him when David was away. That she had started comparing every kiss, every touch, every moment of connection with her husband to the electric tension she felt with Marcus. Instead of words, she reached up and covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her cheek. The gesture was small, but it felt like jumping off a cliff. "This is crazy," she breathed. "I know," he replied, moving closer until she could count the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. But crazy doesn't make it less real. They sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, balanced on the edge of everything changing forever. She could feel the heat of his body, see the way his gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. One kiss, she thought, just one kiss, and then she would know. She would know if what she felt was real or just loneliness and fantasy. She was leaning toward him, drawn by a force stronger than gravity, when the sound of a key in the front door lock shattered the moment like a gunshot. They sprang apart as if burned, Marcus moving to the far end of the couch while Bridget frantically smoothed her hair and tried to calm her racing heart. The front door opened just as she managed to grab the remote and unmute the television. Surprise! David's voice echoed from the entryway. The meeting got cancelled, so I caught the last flight home. Bridget felt like she might throw up. Her husband appeared in the living room doorway, travel bag still slung over his shoulder, grinning at the domestic scene before him. His wife and best friend watching movies on Halloween night, just as he had suggested. If only he knew how close he had come to walking in on something that would have destroyed everything. "Hey, man," Marcus said, and Bridget was amazed at how normal his voice sounded. "Good to have you back. Thanks for keeping my girl company." David replied, dropping his bag and moving to kiss Bridget's forehead. She had to resist the urge to flinch away from his touch, her skin still burning from Marcus's caress. "Of course," Marcus said, standing up. "I should probably head home, though. Early meeting tomorrow." As he gathered his jacket, his eyes met Bridget's for just a moment. In that glance, she saw everything: the longing, the regret, the question of what might have been if David had arrived just 10 minutes later. After Marcus left, David settled beside her on the couch, pulling her close. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "I missed you too." She replied automatically, but the words felt hollow, because as her husband held her, all she could think about was the way Marcus's hand had felt against her face, the way her name had sounded on his lips when he said he loved her. That night, as David slept peacefully beside her, Bridget stared at the ceiling and tried to understand what was happening to her life. She had always been the good girl, the faithful wife, the woman who did the right thing even when it was hard. But now she was lying in bed next to her husband while thinking about another man, and she didn't know how to find her way back to the person she used to be. The days that followed were torture. Marcus stopped coming around as much, and when he did, their interactions were politely distant. But the tension was still there, crackling beneath the surface of every casual conversation. David, busy with work and oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him, didn't notice the way Marcus and Bridget avoided looking directly at each other, or how they both found excuses to leave the room when the other was present. 2 weeks after Halloween, Bridget was grocery shopping when she literally ran into Marcus in the produce section. They stood there among the apples and oranges, both of them frozen by the accidental encounter. "Bridget," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "We can't do this," she said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep pretending that night didn't happen, but we also can't. We can't act on it. I know." He replied, his hands clenched at his sides as if he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. But knowing it's wrong doesn't make the feelings go away. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw her own torment reflected in his eyes. They were both suffering, both trapped between desire and duty, both wondering if doing the right thing was worth this constant ache. "What do we do?" she asked, and she hated how broken she sounded. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe I should transfer to the London office. My company's been asking, and the distance might." "No," she said quickly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "Running away won't solve anything. We're adults. We can handle this." But even as she said the words, she wondered if they were true. Could they really go back to being just friends? Could she really pretend that she didn't love him too? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a text message that would change everything. David was in the shower when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She almost deleted it without reading, assuming it was spam, but something made her open it. The message contained a single photo and a few lines of text that made her blood run cold. "Your husband's business trips aren't what you think they are. He's been seeing someone in Chicago for over a year. I thought you should know. A concerned friend." The photo showed David leaving a hotel with a woman Bridge it didn't recognize. A beautiful brunette who was laughing at something he had just said, her hand resting intimately on his arm. The timestamp showed it was from his most recent trip just last week. Bridget sank onto the bed, the phone trembling in her hands. Her perfect marriage, the one she had been so desperate to protect, had been a lie all along. While she had been wrestling with guilt over feelings she had never acted on, David had been living a double life. The bathroom door opened, and David emerged with a towel around his waist, humming cheerfully. He looked so normal, so innocent, that for a moment she wondered if the photo was some kind of mistake. But then she looked at his face more closely and saw something she had missed before, or maybe had been willfully blind to. The way his eyes didn't quite meet hers anymore, the distracted air that she had attributed to work stress. The new cologne he had started wearing, claiming it was a gift from a grateful client. Everything okay? He asked, noticing her expression. She held up the phone, showing him the photo. She watched his face cycle through surprise, denial, and finally resignation as he realized his secret was out. "Bridget, I can explain, can you?" she asked, her voice eerily calm. "Can you explain how my faithful husband has been cheating on me for over a year while I've been home alone, feeling guilty for having feelings for someone I never even kissed?" David's face went white. "What do you mean, feelings for someone?" The words were out before she could stop them, fueled by hurt and betrayal and the overwhelming need to level the playing field. "Marcus," she said simply, "I'm in love with Marcus and he's in love with me. But unlike you, we never acted on it because we thought honor and fidelity actually meant something." They stared at each other across the bedroom, both of their secrets now lying between them like broken glass. David sank into the chair by the window, his head in his hands. "How long?" he asked quietly. "How long have I loved him, or how long have you been cheating on me?" "Both." "I've had feelings for Marcus for months," she admitted, finding strange relief in finally saying it out loud. "But nothing happened between us, nothing physical anyway. As for your affair, apparently longer than I've loved him." They sat in silence for a long moment, the ruins of their marriage scattered around them. "Her name is Rebecca," David said finally. "She's a marketing consultant I met on my first Chicago project. It just happened. I never meant for it to go on this long, but it did," Bridget said. "For over a year it did. While I was here being the perfect wife, you were building a whole other life with someone else. I'm sorry," he whispered, and she could see tears in his eyes. "I'm so sorry, Bridget. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me," she replied. "And the worst part is, I probably would have kept torturing myself over Marcus, kept choosing duty over happiness, if I hadn't found out about your lie." David looked up at her then, and she saw something she had never seen in his eyes before. Fear, real, genuine fear that he was about to lose her. "What happens now?" he asked. Bridget stood up, feeling suddenly lighter than she had in months. The guilt that had been crushing her was gone, replaced by a clarity she hadn't felt in years. "Now I'm going to call Marcus," she said. "I'm going to tell him everything, and then I'm going to see if it's too late for us to find out what we could have been. And us." David's voice was small. She looked at her husband, really looked at him, and felt surprised by the lack of anger she felt. Instead, there was just sadness for what they had lost, and acceptance that maybe they had been losing it for longer than either of them wanted to admit. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe we can work through this. Maybe we can't. But I know I can't keep living a lie, and I can't keep choosing martyrdom over happiness." She picked up her phone and headed for the door, then paused and turned back. "For what it's worth," she said, "I really did love you, the version of you I thought you were." As she walked out of the bedroom, she could hear David crying behind her, but for the first time in months, she wasn't crying too. Instead, she was thinking about Marcus, about the way he had looked at her that Halloween night, about the possibility of a love that was honest and real and worth fighting for. She stepped out onto the porch and dialed his number, her heart racing with hope instead of guilt for the first time in months. He answered on the second ring. "Bridget, is everything okay, Marcus?" she said, and her voice was steady and sure. "We need to talk. There's something I need to tell you about David, and something I need to tell you about us." The rain had stopped while she was inside, and now the evening air was crisp and clean, full of possibility. As she began to tell Marcus everything, she realized that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Sometimes trust, once broken, reveals that the person you were trying so hard to protect never deserved your sacrifice in the first place. And sometimes the heart knows what it wants long before the mind is brave enough to listen. The conversation with Marcus lasted 2 hours. They met at the coffee shop where they had had their first real conversation months ago, back when their feelings were just whispers they were afraid to acknowledge. Now, sitting across from each other with all their cards on the table, they talked about everything: David's betrayal, their own complicated emotions, what the future might hold. "I never wanted it to happen this way," Marcus said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I never wanted your marriage to end because of me." "It didn't end because of you," Bridget replied, interlacing their fingers. "It ended because David chose to betray it long before we even met. What we feel for each other, that's separate from his choices." As they sat there, holding hands in the warm glow of the coffee shop lights, Bridget felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the simple joy of being completely honest about her feelings. No guilt, no shame, no constant war between desire and duty. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be divorce papers to file, difficult conversations to have, judgments from people who wouldn't understand the full story. But as Marcus brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, Bridget knew she was finally on the right path. 6 months later, as she and Marcus watched the sunset from the porch of her new apartment, she thought about that rainy night when everything changed. About how trust once shattered had revealed not just betrayal but also the possibility of something better. About how sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is stop protecting a lie and start living your truth. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked, as if reading her thoughts. She turned to look at him, this man who had waited patiently while she navigated the end of her marriage, who had supported her through every difficult moment without pressure or expectation. "No," she said, and meant it completely. "I regret wasting so much time feeling guilty about loving you, but I don't regret choosing honesty over convenience or happiness over martyrdom." He smiled and pulled her closer, and as the last light faded from the sky, Bridget Kim finally understood what it felt like to be loved by someone who would never make her question her worth, never make her apologize for taking up space in his life. Sometimes the stories that feel like endings are really just beginnings in disguise. Sometimes trusting the wrong person leads you to the right one, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, love finds a way to heal all the wounds that betrayal leaves behind. The heart, after all, knows what it needs. It just takes courage to listen.